Good afternoon, everybody. This is Lance Campo with the marketing department here at Clean Air Industries, and I'd like to take a moment to thank everybody for attending our webinar. Today we have a special guest. It is Nate Bowman. He is the Director of Welding Optimization and Education at Central Welding Supply and the owner and operator of Weld Science, which does consulting and education and some social media outreach in the welding industry. Looking at social media as a whole, over the last 10 years, it's really evolved and it's become a bigger part of how people not only communicate, but how they teach themselves new things and how businesses reach new clients. So it's become a major influence on people's daily lives. And Nate is in touch with that at a high level in our industry. And we're going to be touching on some of those topics today. But first, I'd like to welcome Nate to the broadcast. Nate, how you been?
Good, good. It's great to be on the podcast and or whatever this is, webinar podcast, whatever we're calling it.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
we're we're kind of doing this. Clean Air Industries is hosting a series of webinars and has been doing this for the better part of a year. And we're just trying to reach out to different people in our industry and hopefully make it interesting for people to tune in and listen and learn a little bit about what we're doing as a business, but also what other people are doing. And that's why you're here. So we've worked
yeah,
together in the past a couple of times, and it's good to see you again. Getting close to the holidays here, so
yeah,
it's good to end the season off with, or the year off with, on a high note, I would say.
yeah. Hopefully we deliver and we have a good time. Yeah, to your point about social media, I think that just being genuine is the key to all of this, especially with, AI generated videos and photos and stuff like that. Everybody's kind of worried about that, and I'm not really particularly worried because I will always continue to do things like this. Like you won't catch me sending an AI agent in any of my meetings. I'll be there in person.
In person, education. I can tell you firsthand that AI has really been helping me out with certain tasks. As a person of my age,
Yes.
learning is a visual thing. We're going to touch on that in a minute, though. But before
Yeah.
we do that, I'd like you to take a moment here and tell people your backstory. So, what brought you to the point in your career where you are now? How did this start for you?
Well, it started back in probably like the mid 2000s is probably when I made that like decision. I was in high school. At that time, shows like Monster Garage and Junkyard Wars and Mythbusters were really, really kind of starting to become super popular, and you had, you know, like a new episode coming out every week that you like couldn't wait to watch. This is back like, you know, the like before like TiVo or Netflix, and when you could just kind of choose what you wanted to watch. So shows like that were really inspiring to I think a lot of people trying to figure out what they wanted to do. And when I saw guys like Jesse James like taking something that was one thing and making it into whatever that you wanted, just that like ability to create was like just such a cool thing. And then the other end of that was like I grew up doing construction, worked in construction my whole life, worked as like a ground man on a roofing crew when I was in my, I was like 8 years old, started just picking up trash and stuff. But so I knew that I wanted to end up in the trades, knew I didn't want to be a ground man on a roofing crew. So figuring out like how to build a career out of something that you enjoy doing, like working with your hands, um, that those shows really kind of inspired me to kind of take that path. So I made a plan with like my guidance counselors and everything to take a high school welding program. So I did that, and then went in the Air Force for metal fabrication and painting. When I got out of the Air Force, I did another school, was like a 6 month full-time welding school in upstate New York, to kind of like get me into the industry. And then from there, I worked like I call it. I spent some time in the trenches, just working in different shops, welding, all sorts of different things, just to kind of, it was a great like learning experience for me to one spend like 60 hours a week as a welder, like as your full-time job,
Yep.
and learning, what it takes to do that, and having that discipline to show up to work every day early and working late.
Like a
Um,
real
and
boots on the ground kind of thing.
and I encourage like so many people to do that. I mean, and it's and I'm really glad that I did do that, because now, like as my career has kind of evolved, I went from being a welder, learning about welding science. I took a job. Let's see here. So I welded for a long time, had an opportunity to teach my high school welding program. So I did that for a couple of years. And then I had another opportunity to move up and move across the country and take a job for air gas as an advanced fabrication specialist or welding process specialist for air gas. And at that point, I got my CWI, my CWS, and my CWE. So certified welding inspector, certified welding supervisor, and certified welding educator credential all through American Welding Society. So in the process of studying for all of these credentials, I really learned that welding was a science, and we had a lab and everything at Airgas, and we spent a lot of time at the lab doing procedure development and testing. And it just kind of hit me that like so few people knew that there was a science behind welding, and that you could predict things, you could measure things, and it's not just like magic.
So
So
that
yeah, go ahead.
segues really great into the next question. So uh, obviously you have a lot of you've been in touch with a lot of different strata of the welding industry, going back to the earlier days to through the educational process. What would you suggest is the number one thing that educational facilities and educators and other social media influencers are doing wrong? What are they teaching welders that's wrong? That doesn't
the
make
the
sense. That's not a
the
modern
big
way of thinking.
number one thing, oxy-fuel welding. There's so many schools that I go to all across the country that are still keeping oxy-fuel welding as part of the curriculum, and they're spending a lot of time and resources oxy-fuel welding, and it just hasn't been relevant literally since the 1920s. So for 100 years, when electric arc welding was invented in the 20s, it replaced oxy-fuel welding. So, there's a lot of excuses about, well, it's just like TIG welding and it's just like this. It is, you have a very limited amount of time with your students, and you have a limited amount of time to be learning. So I think that if you're going to be devoting time to education, like you need to be focusing on processes that are relevant in your area for folks to be employed. So like if you're a school, I look at it, you're a stepping stone between you know, being on the outside and then, getting your students to be a potential employee of a local business. So figuring out exactly what wire or electrode that company, in your town or in within driving distance of that school, figuring out what the majority of the stuff that they're using is, and bringing that into the classroom, and focusing your small amount of time that you have with these students on educating them as much as you can on that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love education and welding education, but it's important that we don't spend time like on gee whiz welding information about how, it all started with fire and, all that stuff. That's
Right.
great, but doesn't get you hired, and it doesn't pay your bills.
So are these educational facilities really sticking to a sort of a general curriculum a little too much? For example, if you're out on the coast and you're near shipyards, they should be teaching shipyard styles of welding. Or if you're out in the oil field, you need to learn pipe and things like this. Are you seeing a general program, or do they segment their training?
It's a mix, I would say the majority of like high school welding programs and community college welding programs that I see in the country are using pretty antiquated um, curriculum. And the problem is like you have the folks that are building the curriculum that have the credentials to build the curriculum didn't spend time in the trenches or didn't spend time out in the industry, or they don't spend enough time talking to these local businesses to understand what the actual need is. And that's really the like just a huge missed opportunity on the education front, because it's all about time. Like you have such a short amount of time, and it's about not wasting the time. But in an educational environment, you end up with a lot of folks that are have their, that have to get their box checked. Well, we need to
Yep.
make sure we spend enough time doing this. We need to spend enough time doing this. And sometimes it just gets in the weeds of what they should be doing.
Oxy-fuel welding. I mean, when I started in manufacturing back in the 90s, I mean, I touched on welding briefly, and it was MIG. that was it. There were,
Yeah.
maybe a bit of stick. So I mean, oxy for me, I'm thinking of some guy in an old leather coat cutting with a giant torch. That's what I think of when
Yeah.
I hear that.
Yeah,
Uh,
oxy-fuel cutting is fine. That's fine. Get a set of bottles and a cutting torch and stuff. Teach people how to run that. But oxy-fuel welding, where you're melting two pieces of metal together with a flame, and you're using filler metal in your separate hand, like that, it's extremely antiquated.
okay, interesting. So let's look at the labor market a little bit here. Not just in general across the United States. Is there a welding shortage? Period.
Yeah, yeah, I would say, all the trades are facing like a deficit in folks that are interested in them. And this kind of actually segues a little bit into like why I created a social media profile and the way that I present the industry. Because I think that the need is that we need to kind of frame the welding industry and all of the trades really as a lot more technical. In the past 25 years, technology is really, taken a huge part of the industry. A lot of that worries a lot of folks with robotics and automation and stuff like taking people's jobs, but I don't see it that way, and my customers certainly don't see it that way either. These new technologies need smart welders to operate these different types of things, whether it's handheld lasers, collaborative robots, robotic cells, plasma tables, cutting systems, any sort of thing like that. These are different careers that may not be on folks' radars, and that's this kind of, like I said, segues into like what I try to showcase on my social media, that like welding is a science. It's not necessarily this dirty job that you might not want to do. So I think that attracting a different audience to the industry is a great way to kind of fill that need.
So speaking of like students that are new to the game and business owner operators and people that are doing production planning, what kind of a message would you give to them? Like, for example, we talked recently about how a lot of welding is sort of old school, very sort of not safety conscious, outside of regulatory needs. There's a safety culture that is in people's minds, but how do you get people to come to the table from the very beginning of their career and say, I'm going to be a very technical welder, a scientifically focused welder, very much like what you're seeing in golf with Bryson DeChambeau. He's taken golf in a completely different direction with metrics and understanding the science behind the art of golf. He's taken it in that direction and has had some great results. How does that translate into welding? How do you get people to start thinking like that?
I think it's just a matter of like setting an example. Like, I mean, I beat my head against the wall a lot of times about trying to convince, Carl to make a change. And it just oftentimes it doesn't happen. I don't want to say I've given up, but I've focused my energy on educating brand new folks that are interested in the industry. And again, this is pulling from a different pool of potential welders, right? I want the kids that are really good in science and math class to look at the welding industry as an opportunity. Not necessarily the kids that have gotten kicked out of all the other classes that are like, well, I'm going to choose welding as a last resort. Well, 20 years down the road, like they don't have the passion for the industry that I have. So much like the golf example, I think that setting a good example, like, which is why I created like Weld Scientist. It's not a real thing. It's like Batman, it's like it's a different way of looking at welding, that welding is a science. So um I try to lead by example, and practice what I preach in, like when you see me welding or you see me show up to an event, like you'll notice that I have on, like my PPE is on point. Like it's just part of how I show up.
Ingrained.
It's just built in, so I think it's just a matter, for me personally, it's about setting an example and actually practicing what I'm preaching.
Well, we're speaking with Nate Bowman, who is the Weld Scientist, as he is known on Instagram. He's with Weld Science, his company, and we're talking about the state of education, welding, the technical training, how it affects our industry. And if you'd like to ask a question, please use the question and answer feature located in your interface up at the top. Send us a question, and we'll get to you guys at the end. We'll be answering questions at the end of the broadcast, so take advantage of that. I'd like to talk a bit about how a more technical welder can earn more and how their career
Mhm.
path can evolve. We sort of touched on that the other day, and I think that's something people would really like to hear. Maybe that'll help them understand just how lucrative it can be over time if they take this sort of more technical approach to the career path of welding.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I've been, hearing a lot in the industry and as the, American welding societies and these other welding agencies and stuff try to recruit people into the industry, and they're like, "Oh, I heard you could make like 100 grand as a welder." And I've been telling students that you can make millions in the welding industry rather than just cap it off at like, well, you can make 100 grand a year as a welder. Like that's a great aspiration and everything, but I think that the welding industry has so much more to offer. Another phrase that I use is like, the more you learn, the more you earn. And in that, that area, I would say the best place to learn would be the Certified Welding Supervisor Handbook. It's an orange book. It's sold by American Welding Society, written by a guy named Jack Barkoff, who worked in welding sales and realized that there is a science to how to run a shop. And that has been like when I studied for my certified welding supervisor credential, and in the things that I learned in that orange book, I learned way more in that than I did studying for my CWI or as a welding educator or any of those other things. Because it focuses like basically on like the levers that you have to pull as a welder, like what control you have over like how long it takes or how much you spend on your process. So the three examples would be weld volume, operator factor, and deposition rate. So, I mean, I'm not going to get into what those things mean, but those three levers are basically the levers that you have to pull as a shop owner or as a welder trying to get a project done. So it's definitely worth studying. And if anybody has any questions about it, you like reach out to me on social media, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about what that looks like.
Yeah, that seems to touch on some of the sort of business management type of thinking that you would require when you talk about earning, seven figures or high six figures in the welding field. You're talking about owning and operating businesses that may have multiple employees and serve different
Mhm.
types of industries, maybe specialty welding. Speaking of processes, talk about some of the processes that are not related to welding with a torch in your hand. We touched on this a couple of days ago, and I just wanted to hear your take. Whenever people think of welding, they typically think of somebody dressed up in PPE, working at a bench or a downdraft table and doing their welding. What other types of welding, whether it's with cobots or fully automated, what types of processes are you seeing that are becoming more emergent and becoming a bigger part of how industry is building and developing products?
Yeah, I think the big, elephant in the room is handheld laser welding. I mean, we've all seen the TikTok videos and, videos of people welding stuff with these little
Yeah,
Chinese handheld lasers.
I
And
got one. I got one here. Let's
I'm sure
find that
there's,
right
yeah,
now.
yeah, sure, there's a clip of that
There we
someplace.
go.
But yeah, these guys. So when I first saw these come out, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I kept them as at arm's length, and I did what I tell everybody not to do. You know, I encourage people always to be curious about new welding processes. And it wasn't until I met this guy, Rex Alexander, who's the former head laser welding engineer for SpaceX in the Starship program. He owns a company called the Handheld Laser Institute now. And he did a class on handheld laser welding. And he started showing some test results from these welds, tensile tests and stuff like that. And when as a weld inspector, I was a weld inspector for nearly a decade, I understand this language. And I'm like, you're getting these results with that toy, in my head. It was very eye-opening. So I actually did a deep dive video with him. Shameless self plug here, but like if you want to see it, check out YouTube. The title of the video is called "I Was Wrong About Laser Welding," and rightfully so, because and he even talks about it too. When the laser showed up at SpaceX, they kept it in a box for a long time, and they were like, I don't really know. We want to get this thing out, and it's kind of a toy, and I don't really know. Well, now a huge majority of that ship is welded with a handheld laser. So if they're putting things into orbit, it's definitely good enough to weld your handrails and tanks and things that you might have in your shop. So don't sleep on new technology. be curious. I'm not saying go out and buy one right away, but look at it, you know?
That's interesting. You see, you're talking. You can talk a little bit about some of the technical stuff, like the penetration rate and things like this. This is I need to know to learn these things as well. Like,
Yeah,
so specifically for the laser, when I see it, the first thing I'm thinking of as a camera person is how is that not shooting laser light all over the room? What's
it
happening
is.
there?
It
So it
is.
is. Okay.
It is. So, anytime you have a laser, you need to have a laser safe enclosure, so that that beam, because a lot of times, like if you're welding on stuff, you're welding on like high polished stainless steel. Absolutely, that beam can reflect. Um, you have to be in laser safe glasses,
Okay.
and having this enclosure to prevent that laser beam from escaping, because it will go through you, like without it doesn't, if it's capable of melting steel together, it has no problem going through your gloves or jacket or your eye or
Zapping
whatever.
my eye into oblivion. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and it literally only take it less than a second and you are blind. So when you see these guys shooting bugs with these handheld lasers, and you'll see they'll have the safety clamp that's supposed to complete the circuit clipped to the end of the gun, and they're just wielding this thing around. I mean, that's pretty
Taking a
dangerous.
chance. You know,
Taking a chance.
it's interesting that you bring that up because if anybody has spent a lot of time on social media, be it on YouTube or on TikTok or whatever, there are a lot of people doing social media influencing in the welding sphere,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is very sort of, you know, hack, not particularly from a science sort of approach,
Hmm.
dangerous sort of behaviors. People are giving out a lot of misinformation that new young welders might not be able to pick up on.
Yeah.
How do you distinguish your information as being a bit more of an authority on how to do things right?
I think it's just a matter of like, number one, being genuine. I'm not here to sell anybody any products, or anything like that. I mean, I do have a great partnership with like Lincoln Electric. They sponsor a lot of my events. Like one of these photos here, I'm welding at Goodwill, and they help provide all the equipment and welding material and stuff like that too. But I think the big thing is, setting an example, being genuine, and then backing it up with the facts. Like, I don't post like my opinions on things. Like, I do agree with the sentiment that there are a lot of clowns out there on social media that just make nonsense posts, and new welders don't have the opportunity to, they're not able to determine whether it's true or not, and it just sometimes is based on how many followers this person has, and
Yeah,
it's a slippery slope. But I mean, I think that just, you know putting out data, putting out the facts. And the other thing I won't do, I don't argue with people in the comments. It's
yeah.
kind of takes me back to, the, like, I'm not going to convince Carl anything different. So it's like, look, you could take it or leave it, but I'm not about to like pick fights with people in the comments. Like,
That like
here's
the
the
early
data.
days of the internet.
Yeah. I mean,
It
and
was it was a wild wild west, you know.
we have we posted something recently. I was asked to guest or co-host a podcast with a Fabricator Manufacturer Association at FabTech, and I'm talking to this guy Matt King, who's a field applications engineer for 3M, and he's been there for, I think, 20 years or something. Like, this guy has seen a lot, and we made a comment about operator factor. And there's a bunch of comments and stuff in the thing, like, oh, well, I weld all day and I do this and this and that. And it's just like, this is the data that we're seeing, and we're giving you these numbers to provide, with you guys with some information. And it's like, as tempting as it is to get on the keyboard and like argue with these people, I just kind of have to remind myself that I've been doing this for over 20 years. Like, I'm confident in my data, and the
Yeah.
data doesn't care what your opinion is.
Yeah, not
So
everybody has the benefit of that level of experience or insight. And I would like to touch back on education a little bit because that's sort of kind of what we're discussing a little bit here is how
yeah.
information is disseminated through the public. And at recent trade shows that I've been to, I've noticed you mentioned Lincoln, and Lincoln has like sort of a virtual training center where they have the VR goggles. Have
Yeah.
you tried? I'm assuming you've tried this before many
Yeah,
times.
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Walk us through what is the value of this, other than being a nice trick that you can do at a trade show or that I've ever seen, because I've never seen it in an educational setting or
Mhm.
on an on-site training. So talk a little bit about that VR experience and how that's helpful to a new welder.
Yeah, I think one of the really good things, another thing that we've been seeing in the industry, my business partner and I, Demi Clark, we've worked on this Goodwill project together. We taught at SpaceX. So where we see the VR stuff being really beneficial would be in this kind of younger generation between like 8 and 12 years old. So this is before, they're in high school, and they're before that point, like I was like 12, 13 years old when I was kind of making this career path decision.
Yeah.
So it's a great thing to kind of hook, like I said, these more technical students into that space. It's like, hey, we're using virtual reality to do this sort of thing. And the benefits behind this is it teaches, the way that the Lincoln one works, it teaches you the science behind welding. Like it removes the it removes all the sparks and smoke and all that stuff, and it leaves you with just the variables that you have. So you have to set up wire feed speed, voltage. You have to understand what your inputs are, your contact dip to work distance, your gun angle, your travel speed. So all of the inputs that you as the person operating that piece of welding equipment, it just leaves you with that, and it gets rid of all the, I guess, the exciting part of it, or the dangerous
The
part
nitty
of.
gritty.
Yeah, and it helps you kind of understand, like, how do I set my machine? How do I hold the gun? How do I get the angle the right way? So I do think it's a great tool. It just has to be kind of framed that way and then used that way. And I think that a lot of people look at it like, oh, well, this is going to replace handheld welding, or and it's just not that. It's a tool. It's another tool in the toolbox.
The way you just described it to me, it's if you were to take a person off the street who's never welded before, and they were a bit apprehensive about getting into a welding environment with a real, high voltage, high amperage welding piece equipment, this would be an excellent way to sort of start and foster a set of principles on how to approach a job. You come
Mhm.
in, you do this, you put on your equipment, you set this, you do that, and then it's a systematic approach, like an SOP for every time
Yep.
you decide to go welding. For me, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it's funny that you say that, because when I teach a lot of new welders, and we typically, what I do is, like, on a first day, if I teach a class like that, like where we're actually welding, I'll have the students welding within typically the first hour of the class. But I will set their machine for them, I will hold the gun for them, and I will make that first weld with them, where I'm literally holding their hand.
yep.
And then like, by the second day, we kind of explain that, like, well, you can adjust the machine and you can change settings and things like that. And the obvious, like, it's like so obvious to everyone that's not in the industry, like, well, why don't you, like, you could just have a recipe for this. You could just set the machine. Like, why doesn't anybody do this? And that's a welding procedure. And we hear about welding procedures all the time, but nobody seems to want to use them. Everybody's out there just like baking cookies and cakes and stuff like that, and they have no idea where they set their oven. They just take them out when they look good or when they think they look good. But yeah, there's a specific recipe and a best way to make a weld. We can measure it scientifically.
Yeah, to get
So yeah.
to maximize weld strength, penetration, and longevity, and to reduce porosity and things like this. See, I do know a little bit about welding.
Yeah, yeah, and all the other stuff too is, like, if you have this procedure, it takes the stress off of the operator to make those decisions that they may not really truly have a full understanding of, like what the knobs do on the front of the machine. If you just tell them where to set it, let them focus on making gorgeous welds, and let the welding engineers and weld inspectors and all these other nerds figure out exactly how to dial it in. So, but this
Well,
is also, go ahead.
I was going to say, to that end, where could somebody, what is a good resource for somebody who's keen to understand? Let's say we're talking about mild steel, just for the moment, or aluminum or something like that. What is a good handbook? Could you recommend a handbook that would talk about the right settings for different gauges and material stock and wire?
Yeah, so the welding procedure handbook from Lincoln Electric, they've been making that same, that's like often called the welding Bible. They've been making that for years. It has a lot of great starting point settings wise. Also, any electrode that you have, if you're MIG welding and you look at the tag on the inside of the wire, it will tell you exactly what the specific electrode is. And you can just go into Google and say, like, let's say you had a solid wire, just the 035 solid wire, and you're using like L56 Lincoln, right? So you could just type up Lincoln L56 PDF or spec sheet PDF. And if you pull that up, it gives you the manufacturer's suggested operating procedures, and it gives you a full range of settings that you can then apply. And all of those settings are going to run um, really well because I mean they're developed by the manufacturer. And not just Lincoln does this. Lincoln does probably the best job with their spec sheets, but
Mhm.
Hobart, ESAB, Select Arc, any of these companies are going to have a spec sheet. So um,
Now you see,
whatever wire you're using, yeah, PDF spec sheet.
I'm the reason why I bring this up is because I know that a portion of our listeners here are in touch with this, and a portion of them are not. So I wanted to make
Yeah,
sure
of
that we covered that sort of thing. I
course.
did want to go touch on another subject that we have sort of broached briefly, automation.
Hmm.
So we talked about the actual process of joining materials and setting up the input, that is the wire and the voltage and current. When we talk about automation as a career path, specifically for welding, at what point would you decide to go that route? We're talking about programming, we're talking about production planning and things like this. How does that play into the educational part of becoming a technical welder?
Yeah, I mean, and then that can start at any time. I mean, if you, I think of students that are taking like a lot of technical classes in, junior high school, and maybe you're taking like a robotics class or something. I mean, you could, I've seen so many times where we've gone out and demoed a collaborative robot at a junior high school or high school, and those students are 10 times better and more just they than I am. Like, and I've been around it and I have opportunity to see these things all the time. It's just I think the mindset is different in this younger generation. We saw like a kind of a weird period of time. Like I said, in the past 25 years, we've seen this like exponential growth. So like welders started to have screens on them, and the old timers are like,
Yep.
why do they need screens and blah,
Right.
whatever.
I got
But
big dials on my old unit here. Why would I need a
yeah,
screen?
right. But you have the next generation of welders that are coming into the industry. They grew up with a screen, so they're like, oh, that welder has a screen. Like I'm a lot more comfortable with that. Or like a teach pendant for a collaborative robot or a robotic cell or a CNC. I mean, it could be a mill, a lathe, could be a CNC plasma cutting system. I think that you know it all comes back to the folks that are trying to get into the industry. The kid that has been awful in science and math and all these other classes and has gotten stuffed into the high school welding program, that may not have that same technical, like they're not interested in technology the same way that the kid that's taking the robotics and the engineering classes are. We need to steal some of those folks and have them come over and run some of this automation. So on the flip side, if you're in the industry and you're already out in the industry and you're welding widgets, right? You weld the same widget over and over and over again, and you're kind of feeling like, man, that robot might take my job. Why not ask your employer to have you be the guy that's trained on it? If they invest 100,000 minimum in a collaborative robot, or we're talking 500 to a million or more on a full size robotic cell, if you're the guy that can run that or gal person that can run that, they're not gonna. The opportunity for them to find a reason to get rid of you becomes very small
Yeah, I was going to say a
because
little job security there.
yeah, absolutely. And then also the pay increases that should come with that. And if they don't give you them, boy, you can hold their feet to the fire because I bet you a shop down the street's got a robot sitting in the corner that they would love to pay you to run because somebody else moved down the pipeline. So this is back to that more you learn, the more you earn. Um, don't be afraid of that sort of thing. If you're an expert in the welding industry, the robotics and the automation and stuff will kind of come naturally. And folks that
Yeah.
have a lot of experience in the industry make great operators for those.
It's coming, and it's you see the changes every day.
Yeah.
Just like to remind our audience, this is a webinar titled "Forged by Fire: Nate Bowman's Journey, the Mission to Protect Young Welders." Now, we haven't talked much about health and safety, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this is being hosted by Clean Air Industries, and we are a full-service air filtration provider that does help the manufacturing industry. There's a shameless plug for you, right?
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the practical day-to-day health concerns that young people have. And we did touch on this a couple of days ago. There is an emergent ideology in young people about health. They're more conscious of health. They're more aware of it. They're far more likely to take safety warnings, at least listen to them and understand them a bit better than some of the older people that maybe kind of like, wow, I've been doing it like this for 40 years. I'm not going to change my routine now. Uh, let's talk a bit about some of those problems. What is the number one issue that a welder on the shop floor is facing in an 8-hour shift? Number one.
I would probably say, fume would be probably one of the biggest one, and then the other one would probably be, like eye safety, eye injuries. Any of those, both of those two things. Um, so yeah, meeting a bunch of young welders and asking folks questions or answering folks questions at high schools and community colleges and things like that. I mean, this is something that comes up all the time. I've been welding for 25 years. I still have perfect 20/20 vision. I haven't lost any of my hearing, and I attribute a lot of that to being very conscious about wearing the correct protective equipment from day one. So I think investing in high quality protective equipment is a great thing. And this kind of goes back to what we were saying about culture. Like you'll see me dressed head to toe. Like I wear up and smoke welding jacket. I'll have heat wave safety glasses on. I'll be in mechanics wear gloves.
Yep.
And you'll catch me in a speed glass welding helmet. And it becomes part of like your costume. Becomes part of like what you wear. I mean, and you can see it in any of these photos. Granted, this photo is a stage photo for a magazine that I was on the cover of, but
Let me. I was gonna say, let me find you one here.
yeah, yeah, any
Uh,
of these other ones, yeah. So, yeah,
there-
heat wave safety glasses, 3M prototype hood in that photo, but yeah, the jackets and gloves are a super common thing. So, I think it's just again, it's all about being personal protective equipment is personal, and I think that folks should look at like how do you become comfortable in your personal protective equipment before you start your work. If your gloves are like mascot size gloves, you're not going to have the dexterity that you need to be able to do the task that you want. So chances are you're probably going to take those gloves off to do the things that you want to do. That's not really that safe. Your safety glasses, they're fogging up or they're uncomfortable on your face, or you can't see what you're doing, so you take them off. Now you're exposing yourself. So, uh, having an old, nasty, musty leather welding jacket that's really hot and doesn't breathe, your
yep.
chances are you're going to take that off. So figuring out what the dangers in the shop are, and then kind of tailoring your outfit, if you will, so that you're comfortable in that shop, in that environment, and you meet all the safety requirements. I think it's a great way. It helps you also weld a lot better, like when you're comfortable and you can see. So
I could tell you
yeah.
as a photographer, I know who spent a fair amount of time in and out of production environments. I've gotten hit with arc eye twice.
Oh, flash burn, yeah.
Flash red. What a miserable experience that is. If you've
Mhm.
never had it, it's like what is it? It's like sunburn on your eye, right?
It
Essentially.
is, yes.
And
It's the
you're
ultraviolet light is burning your eyes.
sitting there in the friggin' bed at night and you can't your eyes are scratchy and watering and it's just a miserable experience. So for me, the full face welding helmet for me is the key piece of gear, and I'm not going to be doing the old tack and squint technique anymore, like you see a ton of that
Yeah.
in the shops as well.
Well, that ultraviolet light doesn't only hurt your eyes, it can also hurt your skin.
Yep.
So if you're tack welding, so you're like, oh, I'm just tacking stuff up, and you're holding it and you're tacking it, like this whole inside of your arm, like in here, This is
Yep.
not skin that's normally exposed to like the sun's ultraviolet light. So it's particularly sensitive. Your wrists and things like that are the same way. So
It
you
is.
can get some pretty nasty burns just from the arc, if you're not covered up. So I have a lot of tattoos. I'd like to keep them nice, so I keep them covered up. And also, I just like to keep my skin nice. I don't want to be look like a old like burlap sack by the time I'm 50 or something.
Oh shoot, I'm 51. You just hit me right in the heart there, Nate. Right in the heart.
Well, I got another 20 years or so before or no, I guess not. Yeah. Maybe not 20 years, 12 years before I'm 50. So,
Uh,
yeah,
so I'd like to
not
take a
too far
moment to
behind you.
remind everybody, if you'd like to ask a question, use the question and answer function located at the top of the interface. And we're getting close to the end here, Nate, but I wanted to hit you with something. Uh,
Sure.
what is the one myth in this industry that you'd like to see killed in 2026?
Mm. I would say like my favorite one, probably the one that comes to mind is that voltage is the heat. This is like probably one of the biggest misnomers in the welding industry. In MIG welding, you have two knobs on the front of your machine. You have voltage and wire feed speed. I don't know. I mean, we could get in the weeds, but voltage is not the heat. It's part of the equation. But voltage, I try to explain to people, imagine a flashlight shining against a wall. When you turn the voltage down, the flashlight, that circle is getting smaller and more focused. When you walk away, the circle is getting a lot bigger. So a lot of people associate turning the voltage up. It's like, oh, it's more heat, and people assume more heat equals more penetration. Heat does not equal penetration. Heat is just heat input into a part. And that's not how penetration works. Penetration is actually tied directly to amperage. So increasing your wire feed speed or going up a larger wire diameter will increase your well penetration, not the voltage. So that's the big
Interesting.
one.
As interesting for me, like in my limited knowledge of welding, I think I probably would have fallen into that category. In all honesty,
It's very
so
deceiving.
let's look. Look, if you had $300 and you're a new welder, three four
Mhm.
hundred dollars, what is the first piece of equipment that you would buy?
If I had $300 as a new welder, I would
Yeah,
buy
let's say up to $500. If you just
Five
you're
hundred
out of
bucks, I would
yeah,
buy a speed glass welding helmet, probably used 9002 NC off of eBay, something like that. Maybe spend a couple $100 on that. I would buy a welding coat that fits you properly, and I would spend anywhere between 80 and $100 on that. I'd buy a pair of Heat Wave or other Oakley, some high-end pair of safety glasses. You have to wear them 10 hours a day or more.
yep.
I would buy those, and then I would invest in probably a pair of mechanics wear welding gloves. If I had to pick one pair, I would pick the regulators. They're made out of bore and they have 360 cut protection, so they kind of meet a couple different requirements for you. And they have excellent dexterity, and that will get you pretty much there. I mean, you got your gloves, you have your welding jacket that fits you, you have a hood and safety glasses that you actually, and all of these things are things that you'd want to wear for $500. Yeah, I'm in every single one of these photos, pretty much.
So if you had to pick, let's close her off here. You're talking to a new welder, somebody who's just about to get into this industry. What is the top piece of advice you want to give them to get them going in the right direction?
I would say get in your car, drive around your town, and find weld shops that you might want to work at. Vibe check the parking lot. If the parking lot has a bunch of crappy cars that have three different tires and wheels on them, just keep going. Find a shop that looks like they have nice cars in the parking lot, a weld shop, and then walk in the door and ask them what it takes to get a job there. And if you can have a tour. That's what I tell this advice to everybody, and you'd be amazed how few people take the advice. But this is how I got my first, second, third, fourth, fifth welding job, by showing up in person. And these days, fewer and fewer people are doing that. And it becomes more and more difficult for the owners, the secretaries, the powers that be to push you out the door when you're already there asking for a job, especially if you have a duffel bag with a welding jacket and hood and all that stuff, and you could start today,
Yeah,
now, right away.
ready to go. You never know if somebody just walked out the door or didn't get out of bed that morning and that was the final straw for the production manager kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Nate, I mean, you're on Instagram at Weld Scientist.
Yep.
How else can people reach you?
Yeah, you can hit me up in my DMs on there. I answer everybody's question. I always answer anybody's messages on Instagram. LinkedIn, you can find me, Nate Bowman. YouTube, it's I think Weld Science or Weld Scientist. You can just Google that or whatever, and I'll come up. But the easiest way to get in touch with me would be through Instagram, or you know anything like that. I mean, you can easily find my phone number or email or whatever. Like, reach out and I will close the loop. That is a huge part of this. Like, I practice what I preach. So if I say, reach out and I will get back to you, I really will get back to you and we will close the loop.
Well, as people may have ascertained by listening to this presentation, that the welding industry is changing every day, and folks like Nate Bowman are out there helping our young people learn. So I would encourage you guys to reach out to Nate if you have any questions that we didn't cover today, and he's available to help you out. Of course, if you have any needs or questions about air filtration safety, reach out to our team here at Clean Air Industries, clean-air.com, and we'll be happy to help you out. And one more reminder, Nate, if you're available in February, we're doing another webinar series. This time we're going to be covering the Fume Dog products here that are produced by Clean Air Industries, and we'd like to invite you to that. So I'll be reaching out to you. Maybe you can
Yeah,
help
I'd love
us
to.
get a bit of attention for that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Nate, for coming out today, and thank you to all our guests for joining us. And stay safe out there and enjoy your welding. Have a good
Bye, everybody.
holiday season too, everyone.
Yeah, bye, everyone.